Everybody, it's Miss Megan. It's Sunday, April 19th, and I'm so excited to get into our Sunday school lesson today. So let's get started. So our lesson today and going forward is going to be on the book of Leviticus and how we make connections between the Old and the New Testaments. So what's so exciting about this is that because we just finished Easter, we will be able to think and look back when we talk about what was happening with the Israelites and all the things God asked them to do to help bring them to Him, how Jesus fixed all of these problems for us. And I think since we've just covered Easter, it's going to be really exciting to look back and see why He had to do what He did on the cross. So we are going to be today talking about how God ordained the sacrificial system. This is lesson 28 from our Sunday school curriculum, and this is our first lesson in the book of Leviticus. So here is the book of Leviticus. It is the third book of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, and then Leviticus. And this is what happened right after the people left Egypt. So all of our lessons will have a central truth and a key verse. And today's central truth is that God's holiness requires a sacrifice for sinful man. And our verse is Leviticus 1:4, which says, "He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him." And I want you guys to think about how this might remind us of Jesus as we go forward. So sacrifices were not new to God's people. There were many sacrifices that we've already talked about through Genesis and Exodus. One of them was when Abraham was asked by God to be willing to sacrifice his own son Isaac. And we do know that he was so faithful and was willing to do that, but thankfully he didn't end up having to do that because God provided the ram. And then when the people sacrificed Passover lambs every year to remember what the Lord had done to bring them out of Egypt, that was also a sacrifice. And we know that one first time they put the blood of the lamb on their door and God passed over them and helped them escape from Egypt. So they were used to the concept of sacrifices, which is when you submit an animal usually on behalf of your sin, because we talked about how we are sinful people, and because God is so holy, we can't be near Him because of our sin. And so He provided a way for us to offer an animal as a sacrifice to cleanse our sin. That's what the Hebrews had to do before Jesus came. So the first type of sacrifice, we're going to talk about a few of them that God asked them to do in the book of Leviticus. The first kind is that one we were just talking about, the burnt offering. And this was the offering of atonement for our sin. And so what would happen is once a year, the priest would get ready to do the sacrifices, and a man of the house would bring a lamb to sacrifice from his flock. It would be the most perfect lamb he could find. And he would have to kill the lamb himself, because this helped him remember why he was needing the blood of someone else. It helped him remember his sin and to be sorry for his sin. And then he would bring the lamb to the priest, who would offer the sacrifice, and the lamb would become the atonement. So atonement is ransoming by the death of a substitute. That's a really big word. So basically what it means is that the lamb took on the sin of the man. His blood, because he had done nothing wrong, covered the sin of the man. And who does this remind us of? This reminds us of Jesus. And the difference between what Jesus did and what they had to do every year was that He only had to do it one time. And we talked about this with Easter. He was perfect. And so they didn't any longer have to sacrifice once a year, sacrifice a lamb, because Jesus was the perfect lamb. And so this was the first main type of sacrifice God asked them to do in the book of Leviticus. And the second type was called the grain offering. So this is more like what we think about if you see offering happening in church, when we're giving our tithes and our offerings. We call it tithing, which is when we give a part of what we've earned through our jobs, through our skills. We give those back to God. We give a part of that to God, to the church, to show how we're appreciative of Him, and to remind ourselves that nothing we have is ours, because everything has been given to us by God. So the Hebrews, they would bring their first fruits or their first grains, and that would be the things that they had made in the harvest when they were farming or with their flocks. They would bring that to offer as a sacrifice to God to thank him for the blessings. And so Jesus, this is where we're reminded of Jesus, he was greater than the grain offering. So there were a lot of rules when they would bring their grain offerings. If, for example, they brought bread, they would have to make sure they didn't have any yeast or honey mixed in with the bread. They had to only have salt because salt preserved bread, but yeast and honey would make it go bad. And Jesus never went bad. That's why he was the bread of life. His bread of his body was perfect and it lasted forever. And so that's why he was better than the grain offerings that the Hebrews had to offer. So the third type of offering and sacrifice was the fellowship offering. And this is sort of like when we have our big meals at church and we all bring a food to share and we set it in a big feast and we all take part in it. We've all sacrificed a little bit of either our money to buy the food or in our time to make it, our ingredients. And so that's what the people would do. They would, again, this involved a lamb and they would offer it to God, but the priest would only keep a small portion of the lamb and everything else would go to the family. And so the family would be able to feast with their lamb that they had sacrificed. And so they were able to get together and it was a fun time. And Jesus fulfills this fellowship offering because he made peace between us. So they would not be able to have their feast until they had sacrificed that lamb because that brought them some peace. And then they were able to enjoy time. And then we don't have to do that anymore because of what Jesus did for us. So he is the feast and he allows us to enjoy fellowship with God and to be with him and to have a personal relationship with him. So the last type of offering we're going to talk about today is the guilt offering. Now this would be like paying someone back when you do something wrong. So if I made someone mad and I stole from them or did something that I would have to say sorry for, the Hebrews would have to pay each other to make do for what they had done wrong. So they would owe someone money. So if you got into an argument with someone, you would pay them money to say, I'm sorry. And that is how your relationship would be restored. Well, Jesus is greater than the guilt offering because he paid man's debt to us. He paid a debt that we could never pay. We owe God everything because we are sinful and he made us, and Jesus paid that debt for us. And he did it out of just pure love for us. And so we don't ever have to offer those types of offerings again. Now, if we mess up and we maybe get pulled over for speeding, if that's ever happened to your parents, we have to pay to the government if we mean to say we're sorry. And there are times we have to pay people, but it's not because of anything having to do with our relationship with God, because Jesus paid that huge debt for us. So let's think back about today's key verse. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. And remember that atonement is a connection with God, showing that our debt has been paid and it has been ransomed by the blood of the Lamb. And that's what Jesus did for us on the cross. And that helps us because God's holiness requires a sacrifice for sinful man to say we are sorry for our sin. And that's what Jesus did. But the Hebrews back in Leviticus, this is right after they left Egypt, they didn't have Jesus yet. So this was the way God set aside for them to still be able to be in fellowship with him and to make themselves clean so that they could still spend time loving him and worshiping him. So here is our craft for today. And if your parents want to get online and they can go to our church website, or I can send them an email if they don't have access to that, and you can download the documents that we need for this craft. It's super easy. You just need white piece of paper, crayons. It's really easy. So what you're going to do is you're going to color each little guy. You color one kind of black like this. You color one red like this. And then you leave one white, or that they suggest if you have like special sparkly glitter paint or something like that, you could paint that. We don't have any of that there here at our house, but your parents might be cooler than me. So if you have some sparkly stuff, you can do that too. And so what you do is we're going to look at this guy with the black, and he's going to be first. And Romans 3:23 tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So this is the black covering our sin. And then the red is Jesus' blood for us. And so the red goes on top of the black, like this. And it shows how Jesus' blood covered our sin, and that it makes us pure. It makes us white as snow because Jesus, his blood, did that for us. So this is super easy, and everyone can do it. If you want to maybe decorate your guy with facial features, you can, and then kind of put the black and red on top of that. But it's a super cute little project to help us remember, and I just hung mine together with the paper clip, or you can do it with yarn or whatever works best for you guys. So we miss you. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.